I am 73 years old, and I never thought that at my age I would be sitting in front of the television, changing channels every 5 minutes and waiting for a call from my own son. My big house has been empty for a long time. Jenny, my wife, died 4 years ago. Cancer. She burned so fast I didn't even have time to be properly frightened. Doctors, hospitals, chemotherapy. It all flashed before my eyes like a nightmare. And then silence. I was once a respected meteorologist. I worked for the local weather station for 30 years, studying clouds, atmospheric fronts, making forecasts. My colleagues used to joke that I could feel the rain with my old knees better than all their modern instruments. And they weren't so far from the truth. I get up from the worn leather couch and walk over to the window. Outside the window, it's October. Lakeland is colored in yellows and reds. Christopher's birthday, my son's birthday, is coming up. He will be 42 years old, though I still remember him as a 10-year-old boy, enthusiastically collecting model airplanes in the garage. Christopher is the only child in our family. Jenny and I always wanted more children, but it didn't work out. Maybe that's why we overprotected him. Even now I wonder about that. When he married Veronica Bird, everyone calls her Nikki, my wife and I were happy. She seemed so energetic, driven, a successful pharmacist, always impeccably dressed, with perfect hair. Christopher literally glowed around her. For the first few years, everything was fine. Sunday lunches, holidays together, trips to Lake Weaver. Jenny and Nikki had even become friends. At least that's how it seemed to me. But gradually something started to change. Nikki started canceling our meetings, saying she and Christopher had other plans. She kept looking at her watch when she came to visit. And then Jenny got sick. The phone rings, interrupting my musings. I rush to the receiver, hoping to hear my son's voice, but it's just Patrick, my neighbor, wondering if I'll lend him the lawnmower. Take it, it's in the garage, I say, not hiding my disappointment. Is something wrong, Albert? Patrick asks. We've known each other for 20 years and he can read my intonation. It's nothing special. I'm just waiting for a call from Chris. He promised he'd come by today. I haven't seen him around here in a while, Patrick says. How's he doing? I sigh. Honestly, I don't know. I haven't seen much of him lately. His wife. I cut myself off, not wanting to complain. They've got a lot on their plate. Nikki's been even more distant since Jenny died. She came to the funeral, of course, sitting next to Christopher in the front row, holding his hand. But I noticed her constantly checking her cell phone. After the wake, they were among the first to leave. Urgent business at work. At least that's what Christopher said. I tried to make things work. I called, invited them to lunch, offered to help with their apartment renovations. Christopher was always polite, but increasingly he cited busyness. Dad, I'll call you back. Dad, let's do it next weekend. Dad, Nikki has an important presentation. We can't. The ringing of the doorbell catches me off guard. I glance at the clock. 16:30. Christopher promised to be in at 5, but it's probably him. I open the door with a smile that immediately becomes a little strained. Hi, Dad. Christopher stands on the doorstep, Nikki beside him. She's dressed in a strict black coat, a silk scarf around her neck. Her cold blue eyes glide over me, assessing my old sweater and worn jeans. Christopher, Nikki, come in, come in. I try to sound cheerful, even though my sister-in-law's presence wasn't my intention. I was hoping to speak to my son alone. They make their way into the living room. Nikki wrinkles his nose, looking around. You should hire a cleaning lady, Albert, she says instead of greeting. At your age, it's hard to keep a house this big in order. I ignore the remark. Tea, coffee? I have blueberry pie from Thompson's Bakery. Christopher smiles. The cinnamon one? I wouldn't say no to that. Nikki puts a hand on his shoulder. Honey, remember your cholesterol. We'll just talk and then we'll go. We've got another meeting with the agent. I put the kettle on and go back into the living room. Christopher is sitting on the couch with his leg up. Nikki has taken my favorite chair. Which agent? I ask. Christopher looks over to his wife. We've decided to buy a house, Dad, he says. The apartment is getting cramped, so we thought, oh, I found the perfect one in West Hills. Nikki interrupts him. It's 2 stories with a garden and a pool in a decent neighborhood. West Hills? I'm surprised. But that's on the other side of town. It's almost an hour from here. Exactly, Nikki smiles, but the smile doesn't touch her eyes. We need more space and independence. Christopher looks a little embarrassed. The neighborhood's really nice, Dad, and the house is great. We're still only in the negotiation stage, but we seem to have a good chance. The kettle whistles and I walk back into the kitchen. My hands shake slightly as I pour the tea. West Hills, even farther away from me. I slice the pie, trying not to think about what this means for our already infrequent meetings. It looks delicious, Christopher says when I bring the tray over. But I think I'll pass. Nikki's right about the cholesterol. I silently set the tray on the coffee table. Nikki doesn't even look at the treat. When are you planning on moving? I ask, trying to sound neutral. If everything goes well, in a month, Nikki replies. I want to have a housewarming party before Thanksgiving. Invite my parents, my sister and her husband. Sounds great, I say, though I'm clenching inside. I hope there's an invitation for me too. There's an awkward pause. Christopher looks at his wife, studying her perfectly manicured nails. Sure, Dad, Christopher finally says, but his voice sounds uncertain. We haven't discussed the details yet, but we're planning a private event, Nikki says coldly. Just the closest people. Besides, Albert, at your age, such trips are exhausting. I feel a wave of irritation rising inside, but I hold back. At my age, people cross oceans and climb mountains, Nikki. An hour's drive isn't a problem. She shrugs. We'll let you know when we've decided on a date. Right now, we gotta go. The agent is expecting us at 5:30. They go upstairs. The visit lasted less than 15 minutes. I walk them to the door. Christopher gives me a quick, almost formal hug. Shokatarnam. I'll call you during the week, Dad, he promises. Maybe I'll stop by on the weekend. Don't forget, we have dinner with the Mallers on Saturday, Nikki adds immediately. I watch them get into their silver sedan. Nikki says something, gesturing vigorously. Christopher nods without looking up. When the car disappears around the corner, I close the door and go back to my cooled tea and untouched cake. 2 weeks pass with no word from Christopher. I call him twice, but both times I get to voicemail. Finally, Friday night, the phone rings. Dad, hi, it's me. Christopher's voice sounds excited. I'm sorry I haven't called you back. I've been really busy. That's okay, I answer. Did something happen? We bought that house, he blurts out. Can you believe it? The owners agreed to our price. We signed the papers this morning. Congratulations, I say sincerely. That's great news. When can I see it? Christopher is silent for a moment. Well, it's undergoing some renovations. Nikki wants to repaint the walls, replace some of the plumbing, then the housewarming, of course, right before Thanksgiving, like we planned. So I'm still invited, I ask, trying to sound joking. Of course you are, Dad, Christopher answers quickly. I mean, Nikki's still working on the guest list, but I'll insist that you come. Insist. Interesting choice of word, so he still has to be persuaded. Son, I say slowly, choosing my words, I think we've been drifting apart lately. I realize you and Nikki have your own lives, but... Dad, Christopher interrupts me, it's okay. It's just that there's really a lot going on right now. A new house, Nikki got a promotion at work, I'm doing a big project. I know, I say, and I'm proud of both of you. Just, don't forget to call once in a while, okay? I promise, he says, and I can hear the sincerity in his voice. Listen, I gotta run. Nikki's waiting. We're on our way to pick out paint for the living room. I'll call next week and we'll talk about the housewarming party. Okay? Okay, I agree. Good luck with the paint. After the conversation, I sit with my phone in my hands for a long time. Something about Christopher's voice makes me uneasy. Did he sound strained? Like he was walking on thin ice? I remember how confident and determined he was when he was younger. Captain of the high school track team, then a successful electronics engineer. When did he turn into a man afraid to speak his mind? The answer's obvious, and it worries me. With Nikki, at first it was almost imperceptible. She just voiced her opinion more often than anyone else, was a little more assertive in offering her options. Christopher gave in because he loved her. Then it became a habit. Now he hardly ever makes decisions on his own. I remember Jenny worrying about this even before her illness. She's suppressing him, Albert, she used to say. Have you seen how she's in charge of him? How she chooses what he eats, what he wears? I waved away her concerns. She just takes care of him. Besides, they love each other. I see now that Jenny was right. A week passes, but Christopher doesn't call. I try to keep myself busy, pruning the bushes in the garden, starting to read a new detective novel, meeting former colleagues at Donovan's Cafe. But thoughts of my son never leave me. On Thursday, I can't bear to call him. "Hey, it's Dad," I say when he finally picks up after the fifth ring. "How's the renovation going?" "Oh, hey, Dad," he sounds out of breath. "It's going pretty good. It turns out the bathroom needs all the wiring replaced, but we're doing okay. Maybe you need some help," I suggest. "I'm no electrician, but four hands are better than two." "Thanks, but we've already hired specialists," he replies. Nikki doesn't want to take any chances with a makeshift repair. "I see," I say. "What about the housewarming party? Have you set a date yet?" "Yes," his voice gets quieter. "Next Saturday, 4 o'clock. "Great," I smile into the phone. "I'll bring a bottle of good whiskey, and maybe I'll bake my apple pie." Jenny always said I was better at it than she was. There is a pause. "Dad," Christopher finally says, "about the housewarming party. Nikki thinks it's best to limit it to just her family. Her parents, her sister and her husband, a couple of close friends. She says the house isn't quite ready yet, and a big party wouldn't be a good idea." I feel something cold and heavy sink into my stomach. "But you said you'd insist on inviting me," I say, trying not to sound offended. "I know, Dad." I can hear the awkwardness in his voice. "And I tried, honestly. But Nikki's so excited about this housewarming thing. She wants everything to be perfect. She says we'll have another meeting later. When everything's ready, then you'll definitely come." "I understand," I say, though I really don't. Nikki wants to impress his family. I'd only be in the way. "No, Dad, not like that." On Arenum, Christopher starts making excuses. "It's okay," I interrupt him. "It is. Just, let me know when it's convenient to stop by. I want to see your new house." "Sure, Dad," he exhales in relief. "I promise we'll invite you over as soon as everything is settled." We say goodbye and I hang up. The house is too quiet. I turn on the TV just to hear human voices, but I don't pay attention to the screen. I can't help but feel like I'm losing my son. Or maybe I already have. I'm 73 years old, and I never thought at my age I'd be sitting in front of the TV, changing channels every 5 minutes, and waiting for a call from my own son. It had been a week since our conversation with Christopher. I tried not to think about the upcoming housewarming party I hadn't been invited to, but my thoughts kept coming back to the situation. Thursday morning, I woke up with an unexpected thought. What if I just bought a gift for their new house? Not to impose on the holiday, but to show that I was thinking of them and wishing them happiness in their new home. After breakfast, I headed downtown Lakeland to Home Gallery, a store that sold items for the home, from cutlery to paintings. Finally, a dark wood wall clock with a brass face caught my eye. "Sure, may I help you?" The consultant, a middle-aged woman with a friendly smile, approached me. "Yes, I'm thinking of buying this watch," I replied. "It's a housewarming gift for my son and his wife." "It's an excellent choice," she approved. "This watch is handmade in Vermont. The movement is Swiss, very reliable. It can be passed down from generation to generation, generation after generation." I like that thought. Maybe someday Christopher and Nikki would have children, and this watch would time their lives like it had timed mine. "I'll take it," I decided. "And is there anything special I can pack them in?" Half an hour later, I left the store with a beautiful box tied with a satin ribbon. The watch had cost me a decent sum, but I didn't regret it. It was not just a gift, but a kind of message. At home, I set the box on the coffee table and pulled out my phone. Before I could dial my son's number, the phone rang. My daughter-in-law's name popped up on the screen. "Albert," her voice sounded tense. "It's Nikki." "Hello, Nikki." I tried to speak kindly. "How's the housewarming party going?" "That's what I'm calling about." She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Christopher said he talked to you about our party." "Yes, he mentioned that you decided to limit it to just your family." I held back the disappointment in my voice. "I understand that's your decision." "Actually, it's my decision," Nikki corrected sharply. "I bought this house. I'm organizing the housewarming party, and I decide who gets invited." Her words caught me off guard. "You bought the house?" I asked her again. "Not you and Christopher together?" "The money is mine," she cut off. "My parents helped with the down payment, and the rest is my salary and my bonuses. Christopher would only invest in the renovations for now." I felt a wave of resentment rising inside. So she doesn't even think the house belongs to the two of them. Nikki, I began, trying to stay calm. I just wanted to congratulate you both and give you a little gift. I can stop by before the party starts, just for 5 minutes. Look, Albert. Her tone became even harsher. I know you don't approve of me. You think I don't see the way you look at me? How you try to point out every time you see me that I'm not good enough for your precious Christopher? What? I was genuinely stunned. Nikki, I never... Don't bother denying it, she interrupted. I just want this day to go smoothly, without too much stress. My parents are coming from far away, and I want everything to be perfect. Without complications. By complications, obviously, I meant me. I took a deep breath, trying to contain my anger. I understand your desire to impress your parents, I said, but I'm not going to cause trouble. I just want to congratulate my son. Shakchurum, you can congratulate him some other time. Nikki cut him off. Albert, I'm not calling to argue. I just want you to know that you're not welcome at our house on Saturday. If you really care about Christopher, you'll honor my request. Her words sounded like a threat. Nikki, I think you're complicating what could be simple, I said. I'm only asking for 5 minutes to congratulate you. No, her voice turned icy. And this is my last word. If you show up on Saturday, it will only prove that you have no respect for me or our boundaries. She disconnected without waiting for my response. I sat there clutching the phone in my hand, feeling the anger and resentment struggling inside me. How dare she? How dare she say I didn't care about my son when she was the one building a wall between us? It took me a few minutes to calm down. Then I dialed Christopher's number. He answered after the third ring. Dad? I could hear the wariness in his voice. Is something wrong? I just got a call from your wife, I said, not trying to hide my irritation. She informed me that I wasn't invited to your housewarming party. In fact, she expressly forbade me to show up. Christopher sighed. Dad, I told you this isn't a good time. Nikki is very nervous about his parents' arrival. They're not the easiest people to deal with, especially her father. He's always criticizing everything she does. Is that why she takes it out on me? I asked. Christopher, I bought you a present. I just wanted to stop by for 5 minutes before the party to congratulate you. What's the big deal? Nothing, Dad, he said tiredly. It's just, Nikki wants everything to go perfectly. You know? It's very important for her to impress her parents. They always thought she could do better. What about you? I couldn't take it anymore. What's important to you? Your father can't congratulate you on your housewarming, and you think that's okay? There was a pause. I could hear Christopher breathing heavily. Of course I want you to come, Dad, he said quietly. But this isn't the time for confrontation. Let's just wait out this weekend, and then I'll come to you and we'll talk about it. Okay? I closed my eyes, feeling something inside me break. My son wasn't just not standing up for me. He was actively avoiding conflict, taking Nikki's side simply because it was easier. Look, son, I said, trying to keep my voice firm, I'm not asking you to fight with your wife. I just want you to realize that what's going on is wrong. Parents and children shouldn't be estranged because of someone else's whims or ambitions. It's not whims, Dad, Christopher said, irritation in his voice. You don't understand Nikki. She had a difficult relationship with her parents. Now she's trying to make things right, to prove to them that she's successful, that she can... What about proving that she respects your family? I interrupted. Your mother would never approve of that attitude. As soon as the words were out of my mouth, I regretted them. The mention of Jenny had always been a sore spot for both of us. Don't, Dad. Christopher's voice turned cold. Leave Mom out of this. You don't know what she'd say or think, and you don't know Nikki the way I do. She's doing all this for us, for our future. Your future, I questioned. Or for her own. You said she didn't even include you in buying the house. She's paying for it herself, deciding who can come. That's not what she said, Christopher objected, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Yes, she's invested more now, but the plan is that I'll pay her back part of it, and the house will be in both our names. Son, I tried to speak softly. I'm not trying to ruin your relationship. I'm just worried about you. I think Nikki is too controlling of every aspect of your life. You're being unfair to her." Now there was outright resentment in his voice. "Nikki works hard. She cares about our future. And yes, she can be harsh sometimes, but she doesn't do it out of spite." I realized this conversation wasn't getting us anywhere. Christopher was defending his wife, which was natural. I looked like a grumpy old man who was meddling. "Okay," I said finally. "I won't come on Saturday. But when this is over, we need to have a serious talk, Christopher." "Sure, Dad," he agreed quickly, happy that the conflict was over. "I promise we'll talk. Maybe next weekend?" "Maybe," I answered uncertainly. "Call me when you're ready." We said goodbye and I hung up. The watch box still stood on the table, a silent reminder that I had been excluded from my son's life. By Friday evening, I finally admitted to myself what I'd been thinking all day. I couldn't just sit at home knowing that my son was celebrating an important event without me. Maybe Nikki was right, and I shouldn't show up at the party itself. But I could have stopped by earlier, before the guests arrived, just to congratulate my son and give him a gift. I knew I was risking Nikki's wrath. I knew Christopher might not be happy. But isn't it my responsibility as a father to be there for the big moments, even if it makes things a little uncomfortable? The decision came naturally. I'll go on Saturday, but early, maybe an hour or two before the official start time. I'll present my gift, congratulate them both, and leave before the guests arrive. Nikki won't be able to blame me for ruining her perfect party, and Christopher will know what his father thinks of him. Saturday morning was surprisingly clear for mid-autumn. I woke up early before 7 and lay staring at the ceiling for a long time. The decision to go to Christopher and Nikki's house, despite her express prohibition, had been on my mind. On the one hand, I realized that I risked ruining an already strained relationship. On the other, I could not bear the thought that I, a father, deprived of the right to congratulate my son on such an important event in his life. After breakfast, I looked at the map again. West Hills, 17 Cedar Street. The neighborhood wasn't very familiar to me, although in my 73 years, I seemed to have traveled all over Lakeland. As a young man, I had worked in the delivery business. And then as a meteorologist, I had traveled to various parts of the city to take measurements. But West Hills had always remained to me an isolated place, a place where people from a different background, with different concerns and interests, lived. I carefully packed the watch in the trunk of the car so that the box wouldn't get wrinkled and left the garage at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The official start of the party was set for 4, so I had plenty of time to get there, talk to Christopher, and leave before the guests arrived. As I got deeper into West Hills, the houses got bigger and the lots more manicured. Mowed lawns, ornamental shrubs, stone walkways, all spoke of wealth and a desire for order. Some houses were surrounded by high fences. Others, on the contrary, showed openness, allowing one to admire the immaculate facades from the street. Cedar Street was quiet, lined with tall cedars as one might expect. The houses here stood some distance apart, each on its own lot. I drove slowly looking for license plates. 13, 15, 17. I stopped the car in front of house number 17, and for a few minutes I just sat there looking at it. A 2-story colonial-style building with white columns and large windows. A small but well-kept garden with a few young apple trees. A circular driveway in front of the house where 2 cars were already parked. Christopher's silver sedan and another car I didn't recognize. Something about the look of the house seemed vaguely familiar. I frowned, trying to remember. Had I been here before? Perhaps driven past it? Or was it just a typical style for this neighborhood, and I'd seen similar houses elsewhere? I got out of the car, retrieved the watch box from the trunk, and headed for the front door. The strange sense of déjà vu intensified as I walked up the porch steps. The wide porch, the copper door hammer in the shape of a lion's head. It all conjured up some images, but I couldn't grasp a specific memory. I pressed the bell button, and a melodic chime sounded inside the house. It took about a minute before the door opened. Nikki stood on the doorstep, already dressed for the party, in an elegant blue dress, with her hair and makeup done. Shukraninem. Albert! Her face changed instantly when she saw me. Surprise was replaced by irritation. What are you doing here?" "Hello, Nikki," I tried to speak calmly. "I know you asked me not to come, but I just wanted to congratulate you both and give you a present." I held out the box. "I'm not staying for the party, it's just Satkanutum. I've made it clear that today is not a good day to visit, she interrupted, ignoring the outstretched box. My parents are going to be here any minute, and I need to finish getting ready. I understand, I replied. I'll only take 5 minutes of your time. Just get Christopher. I want to congratulate him in person. Nikki crossed her arms over her chest, completely blocking the passage into the house. Room. Christopher's busy. Her tone left no room for objection. He's installing bookshelves in the living room. We have a lot to do before the guests arrive. I could help, I offered, trying to sound friendly. No, Nikki cut me off. Look, Albert, I don't mean to be rude, but you obviously don't take the hint. I don't want you here tonight. This is my house and I decide who can enter it. Your house? I couldn't contain my surprise. Not yours and Christopher's? I bought it. Her voice grew even colder. I make the decisions about it, and now I'm asking you to leave. I felt a wave of anger rising inside. Who did she think she was? And how could Christopher let her treat his father like this? Nikki, I tried to speak firmly but calmly, I understand that you're nervous about your parents coming over, but I'm not a stranger. I'm Christopher's father, and I have the right. You have no right in my house, she interrupted sharply. And if you really care about Christopher, you will leave right now before my parents arrive. Otherwise, or else what? I raised my eyebrows. What will you do, Nikki? Dad? Christopher's voice came from deep inside the house, and a moment later he appeared in the hallway with a screwdriver in his hand. What's going on? Your father decided to ignore our request and showed up uninvited, Nikki said, not taking her cold gaze off me. Right before my parents arrived. I just wanted to congratulate you and leave a gift, I repeated, holding out the box to Christopher. My son looked confused. He shifted his gaze from me to Nikki, then back again. Dad, we talked about this, he said with obvious awkwardness in his voice. Today really isn't a good time. We're not done with the arrangements yet. And your wife doesn't want any complications in the form of your father, I finished for him. I get it. Just take the gift and I'll leave. Christopher took the box, but Nikki immediately snatched it from his hands. We can't accept it now, she said. We don't have time to unwrap presents. You can hand it over later when we invite you. I felt something shatter inside. She wasn't just refusing to see me. She wouldn't even let me keep the gift. And worst of all, Christopher was silent, letting her call the shots. Okay, I reached out and took the box. I'll leave. But first, I'd like to talk to Christopher alone. There's no time, Nikki cut off. My parents' car had just turned onto the street. They'll be here any minute. Christopher, show your father out. And she turned around, walking away into the back of the house. Christopher looked at her helplessly, then turned to me. Dad, I'm sorry, he said quietly. This really isn't a good time. Nikki is on edge about his parents, especially his father. He's always criticizing everything she does. And that's why she's acting like this with me? I asked, not hiding my bitterness. Christopher, what's going on? When did you let her take over your life? Decide who you can see and who you can't? It's not like that, he looked hurt. It's just that this is a special occasion. Meeting her parents for the first time in a new home. You don't realize how important this is to her. Do you realize how important it is for me to be a part of your life? I asked. Christopher, every year we see each other less and less. You didn't even invite me to the housewarming party. I wanted to, he said quickly. But Nikki is right. Tonight should be a quiet evening. Only the closest of people. And I'm not close. My voice trembled. I'm your father, Christopher. The only family you have left after your mom died. There was a look of pain on his face. Dad, don't. Not now. Please, let's talk about this later. I promise I'll come visit you next week and we'll talk about it. But for now, please go away. For me. I looked at my son and saw in him the boy I once taught to ride a bike, drive a car, fix a leaky faucet. The one who came to me for advice when he didn't know what profession to choose, what college to prefer. The boy who called every Sunday when he left school to tell me about his week. Where had that Christopher gone? And when his place was taken by this insecure man who can't even stand up for his father to his wife? Okay, I said finally, I'll leave. But that's not the end of the conversation, Christopher. We'll come back to what's going on between us and how Nikki is controlling your life. I turned to go to the car, but at that moment, Nikki reappeared in the doorway. They're already here, she said to Christopher. If their car just stopped. Albert, I urge you to leave. Immediately. There was so much panic in her voice that I wondered what kind of parents she had that she was so afraid of their disapproval. I was about to ask about it, but I noticed Christopher tense up. Dad, please. His voice sounded almost pleading. I sighed and walked to my car. As I opened the door, I noticed a black SUV pull up right behind my car. A middle-aged man and a middle-aged woman got out of it, both with the same cold expression on their faces as Nikki. I quickly got into the car and started the engine, hoping to drive away before the awkward encounter happened. But an SUV blocked my exit. I watched Nikki and Christopher come down the porch steps, greeting the new arrivals. Nikki hugged the woman, her mother I assume, then awkwardly shook the man's hand. Christopher shook his hand too, looking distinctly uncomfortable. I sat in the car, watching this scene and feeling superfluous. Suddenly it hit me. The house! Now I realized why it looked familiar. It belonged to Howard Pierce, an old acquaintance of mine. We weren't close friends, but we often crossed paths at town events and had played golf together a few times. His house I visited twice or thrice for barbecues he hosted in the summer. That was, 15 years ago? Maybe more than that. I frowned, trying to remember what had happened to Howard. Had he left Lakeland? I don't think so. Something had happened. Something serious. But my memory refused to give me the exact information. I was interrupted by a knock on the window. I rolled down the window and saw Nikki's father, a tall man with graying temples and a commanding gaze. Could you move the car? He asked in a tone that didn't suggest refusal. You're blocking the driveway. Actually, you're blocking my exit, I replied, trying to remain calm. But I was just leaving. The man stared at me. Are you? He started, but at that moment, Nikki literally ran up to us. Daddy, it's just a neighbor, she said quickly. He was just leaving. Albert, could you please? Albert, her father interjected. Wasn't that Christopher's father? Nikki turned pale. Yes, she said, but he's not invited to our party. He was just leaving. Nikki's father looked from her to me, and I saw something like contempt in his eyes. I see, he said. Well, let's not delay the neighbor. He stepped away from my car, and I saw Nikki pulling him toward the house, saying something quickly. Christopher was standing on the porch with Nikki's mother, looking extremely uncomfortable. I started the engine and slowly pulled out of the driveway. As I drove past the porch, my eyes met Christopher's. There was a mixture of shame and pleading in his gaze. I nodded at him, a brief gesture that meant I wasn't angry, that I understood his situation, though in truth, I wasn't sure I really did. Pulling onto the road, I stopped, unsure of where to head. Home? To Patrick's poker game? But neither option appealed to me. I was too excited, too upset to sit home alone, and too distracted to play cards. I was driving through the streets of Lakeland with no particular purpose, just to avoid going home. Nikki's behavior, Christopher's passivity, the humiliating expulsion from their new home, all swirled around in my head, filling it with bitterness and frustration. After an hour of aimless driving, I stopped at Maple Grove Park on the outskirts of town. This park was one of Jenny's favorite places. We often took walks here, especially in the fall when the maple trees were turning bright reds and yellows. I got out of the car and followed the familiar path that led to the small pond in the center of the park. It was cool, but the sun was still warming, and many of the townspeople had decided to spend Saturday afternoon outdoors. Young moms with strollers, elderly couples walking arm in arm, children chasing a ball on the lawn. The usual weekend picture. I found a vacant bench by the pond and sat down, looking at the surface of the water, where a few ducks were swimming. Thoughts of Christopher and Nikki kept me on my toes. How could my son let his wife treat me like this? How could he become so passive, so compliant? It was so unlike the boy Jenny and I had raised. And what happened to Howard Pierce's house? Why did he sell it? Or something told me the story wasn't that simple. Something had happened in that house. Something I'd forgotten or pushed out of my memory. Sitting on the bench, I watched the sun go down, and slowly a plan began to form in my head. I couldn't just let this situation go. I couldn't let Nikki distance my son from me even further, and I definitely couldn't let them live in a house with some dark past without knowing it. I decided to return to Cedar Street later that evening when the housewarming party was in full swing. Not to make a scene or embarrass Nikki in front of her parents, just to be there to support Christopher, and maybe to figure out what really happened in that house 15 years ago. I got up from the bench and headed for the car. The sun was almost over the horizon, coloring the sky red-orange. I looked at my watch. It was almost 6 in the evening. The party was supposed to be in full swing. I got behind the wheel, but I didn't start the engine right away. Part of me was still questioning the decision. What would I say when I showed up there? How would I explain my presence? But the other part, the more determined part, insisted I had to be there. For Christopher's sake, for our family, and maybe for the truth about house number 17 on Cedar Street. I turned on the ignition and drove out of the park, heading back toward West Hills. This evening wasn't over yet, and I had a feeling it might bring unexpected discoveries. I drove through the evening Lakeland in no hurry to get back to the empty house. The streets were slowly emptying. Saturday night, most of the townspeople were either families gathering for dinner or out having fun. Familiar buildings, parks, neighborhoods floated by. In 73 years, I had learned this city like the back of my hand, seen it grow and change, seen old neighborhoods fall into disrepair and new ones spring up in their place. The thought of the house on Cedar Street kept me awake. Something had happened there, something tragic connected to my acquaintance Howard Pierce. I knew I should remember, but it was as if my memory was deliberately blocking those memories. I turned onto Center Street and stopped at the Little Blue Cup Cafe where Jenny and I like to have breakfast on Sundays. I'd stopped going there after she died. Too many memories, too painful to sit alone at our favorite table by the window. But today, something was pulling me there. The bell above the door jingled as I entered. The cafe hadn't changed much over the years. The same wooden tables, the same blue curtains on the windows. Even the menu seemed to be the same. "Good evening." The elderly woman behind the counter nodded at me. "Senator, table for one?" "Yes, please," I answered. "By the window if possible." She led me to a different table than the one Jenny and I always sat at, and I was grateful for that. I ordered a cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie, though I had no appetite. Just needed an excuse to sit here, gather my thoughts. While I waited for my order, my gaze slid aimlessly around the cafe. On the wall were pictures of Lakeland from different years. The town square in the 50s, the Independence Day parade in the 70s, the opening of the new bridge over the Clear River in the 90s, the history of the city in pictures. And suddenly my eye caught on one photo. It was of the Harvest Festival, an annual event held in Lakeland every fall. In the foreground stood a group of townspeople with baskets of apples and pumpkins, and among them, Howard Pierce and his wife Lydia. Memories came suddenly like a wave. Howard Pierce was a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and kind eyes, a successful attorney, a city councilman, a respected citizen. Lydia was a petite woman with bright red hair and an infectious laugh. They seemed like the perfect couple, doing charity work together, hosting summer barbecues for neighbors, always ready to help. And then, that awful morning 15 years ago. I remember waking up to the sound of sirens, lots of sirens, police cars, ambulances. They were all heading toward West Hills. The news spread like wildfire through the city. There had been a tragedy at the Pierce house. "Your coffee and pie," the waitress's voice snapped me out of my memories. "Thank you," I nodded, trying to focus on the present. But the memory wouldn't let go. The events of that day, the details I'd heard from neighbors, read in the newspapers, discussed with friends, it all added up to a terrible picture. Howard came home earlier than usual. He'd canceled a meeting with a client. He found his wife Lydia in bed with another man. This man was Edward Collins, his best friend and partner in the law firm. What happened next was reconstructed by police from evidence and statements from neighbors. Howard left the bedroom, walked to his office, retrieved a gun from the safe. He returned to the bedroom and shot first Edward, then Lydia. After that, he went down to the living room, sat in his favorite chair, and shot himself in the temple. A neighbor who was walking by and heard the shots called the police. But it was too late. I remembered the funeral. 3 coffins, 3 families in mourning. I remembered how the town was shaken by the tragedy. Howard always seemed so poised, so rational. No one could imagine him capable of such violence. The house stood empty for a long time afterward. There were rumors that ghosts haunted it, that at night strange lights were seen in the windows and gunshots were heard. Kids avoided it, called it the murder house. I took a sip of my coffee, which had already gotten cold. No wonder Nikki had managed to buy the house at a low price. The locals knew its history and shunned it, and the realtor probably kept quiet about the house's past so as not to scare off out-of-town buyers. But could I let Christopher and Nikki live there without knowing the truth? Without warning them? On the other hand, what could I say? By the way, two lovers were murdered in your bedroom? Or, a man shot himself in your living room? That would only reinforce Nikki's opinion that I wanted to ruin her life. I pushed the untouched pie aside and finished my coffee. A decision had to be made. And maybe find someone to corroborate the house story so Nikki couldn't just dismiss what I said as the invention of a jealous father-in-law. After paying, I walked out of the cafe. The evening was cool but not cold. The first stars had already appeared in the sky. I decided to walk along Central Street, hoping that the fresh air would help me gather my thoughts. People passed by, young couples holding hands, groups of friends heading to bars or restaurants, lonely passers-by going about their business. I walked slowly with no particular goal in mind, just letting my feet carry me forward. Before I knew it, I had reached the city hall, a stately red brick building with white columns. An elderly man was sitting on the steps smoking a pipe. Something about his figure seemed familiar. "Albert, Albert Whitney, is that you?" he called as I passed him. I stopped, staring at his face. Gray hair, neatly trimmed beard, intelligent eyes behind the glasses. "Richard," I said uncertainly. "Richard Baker?" "That's the one." The man smiled and stood up, extending his hand. "How many years? How many winters?" Richard Baker was the former sheriff of Lakeland. We met many years ago when I was just starting out at the Weather Center. Richard was a simple police officer at the time, but was quickly rising through the ranks. We often met at the Blue Cup for breakfast, exchanging news. Then our paths diverged. I was fully immersed in work and family, and Richard became sheriff and was too busy to keep up old acquaintances. "Would you like to sit down?" Richard patted the step beside me. A lovely evening of outdoor reflection. I sat down next to him, feeling strangely relieved to see an old acquaintance. "How are you, Richard?" I asked. "I heard you retired a couple years ago?" 3 years ago, to be exact, he nodded. "I decided that 35 years of service was enough. Now I live a quiet life, fishing on Weaver Lake, playing with my grandchildren. And you? Still predicting the weather?" "No, I'm retired too," I replied. 7 years now, after Jenny died." I hesitated. "Anyway, I decided it was time to give way to the young." Richard nodded understandingly. He'd known Jenny, had visited us several times with his wife, Sarah. "How's your son?" he asked. "Christopher, if I remember correctly." "Yes, Christopher," I sighed. "He's got things complicated. He's married to a woman who seems to be doing everything she can to keep him away from me." I spoke briefly about the situation with Nikki, the housewarming party I wasn't invited to, the humiliating expulsion from their home today. "Where did they buy the house?" Richard asked. "In the West Hills," I replied. 17 Cedar Street. Richard's face changed. He slowly took the tube out of his mouth and looked at me anxiously. 17 Cedar Street? He asked again. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," I nodded. "Why do you ask?" Richard frowned, tapping his pipe on his palm. "It's strange that they chose that particular house," he said thoughtfully. "After what happened there." "Howard Pierce's house," I said, and Richard nodded. "I just remembered today. A triple murder 15 years ago." "Not exactly a triple," Richard corrected me. "Maroon, double murder, and suicide. I was one of the first on the scene, Albert. I'll never forget what I saw there." He took a drag on his pipe, let the smoke out, and continued. "Howard was a friend of mine. We used to play golf together on weekends. I knew he and Lydia were having marital problems. She complained that he was working too much, not paying enough attention to her. But I could never have imagined it would end up like this." "Sonam, I don't think Christopher and Nikki know about the history of the house," I said. "Especially Nikki. She never would have bought it if she had known." "A lot of realtors don't talk about things like that," Richard nodded. "Especially if the buyers aren't local and can't know the town's history. There are loopholes in the law." We were silent for a while, each absorbed in his own thoughts. Then Richard asked, "So Nikki's having a housewarming party tonight, and you weren't invited?" I nodded, feeling a lump of resentment rise in my throat again. She'd expressly forbidden me to show up, said it was her house and she decided who could come in. "That's harsh." Richard shook his head. "And Christopher? What did he say?" "Nothing," I answered bitterly. "Just stood by me and let her talk to me like that. He changed, Richard. He used to be confident, determined. Now it's as if he's afraid of his own shadow, or rather, afraid of upsetting his wife. It's sad when that happens." Richard put his hand on my shoulder sympathetically. "Especially with men of our generation. We raised our sons to be strong, independent, and then they meet women who—" He didn't finish the sentence. But I knew what he meant. "You know," Richard said after a pause, "I'm invited to this housewarming party too." "You are?" I couldn't hide my surprise. "But how do you know Nikki or Christopher?" "I don't know them," Richard smiled. "I know Nikki's father, Gerald Bird. We play golf together at the Pine Hills Golf Club. When he mentioned that his daughter and son-in-law had bought a house in West Hills and were having a housewarming party, I congratulated him, and he invited me to stop by. Said he would love for me to meet his daughter and her husband." I looked at Richard, and slowly a plan began to form in my mind. "Richard," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, "what if we went to this housewarming party together?" He raised his eyebrows. "After you were explicitly asked not to come, are you sure that's a good idea?" "Not really," I admitted. "Oh, but I think Christopher and Nikki need to know the truth about the house they're living in. And who better to tell them than you? You were there, Richard. You saw everything with your own eyes." Richard tapped his pipe thoughtfully on his palm. "I'm not sure a housewarming party is the right time for such revelations," he said. "Think about it. Their first party at the new house. Nikki's parents arriving. And then I show up and tell them about a triple homicide that happened right here. I don't think that's going to add to the festivities." "But they need to know," I insisted. "Imagine they continue to live there in ignorance, and then one of their neighbors or acquaintances happens to mention the story. Wouldn't that make it worse?" Richard sighed. "Maybe you're right," he agreed grudgingly. "But I still think there's a better time and place for such conversations. Maybe I could invite them to lunch next week and tell them all about it." "What if Nikki says no?" I objected. "What if she thinks I put you up to it, to spoil her impression of her new home?" "No, Richard, we have to act now while all the guests are here. Then she won't be able to dismiss the story as fiction." Richard was silent for a long moment, considering my words. Finally, he nodded. "All right," he said. "I'll take you with me, but on the condition that you don't provoke conflict. No confrontations with Nikki or Christopher. We come in, I introduce you as an old friend, we mingle with the guests, and only then, at the appropriate moment, do I bring up the history of the house. Agreed?" "Agreed," I answered quickly, feeling relieved that Richard supported my plan. "And also," Richard added, rising from the steps, "we need presents. We can't go to a housewarming party empty-handed." "I have a present," I said, remembering the clock that was still in the trunk of my car. A wall clock. I bought it especially for Christopher and Nikki, but Nikki refused to accept it today. Great," Richard nodded. "I'll stop at the liquor store on the way and get a nice bottle of whiskey. Gerald will appreciate it." We agreed to meet at Richard's house in an hour to go to the housewarming party together. I said goodbye to him and went to my car parked nearby. On the way to Richard's house, I couldn't help but think about what awaited me. How would Nikki and Christopher react when they saw me? What will the guests say when they find out the truth about the house? And most importantly, how would that truth affect the lives of my son and his wife? But no matter what happened, I was ready. For Christopher, for our family, for the truth, and maybe for the memory of Howard Pierce, whose tragic story had been buried under a layer of years in silence. Richard's house turned out to be a cozy one-story cottage on a quiet street on the east side of Lakeland. I parked at the curb and sat in the car for a while, contemplating the upcoming meeting. Doubts lingered. Am I doing the right thing by showing up to the housewarming party against Nikki's explicit prohibition? But the thought of the bloody mystery of 17 Cedar Street gave me resolve. They must know. Richard appeared on the porch as I walked up the path to his house. He'd changed his clothes. He was now wearing a tweed jacket over a plaid shirt and dark blue pants. "Ready?" he asked, locking the door. "As ready as I'd ever been," I answered, though my insides were clenched with nervous anticipation. We decided to drive in Richard's car, a solid black sedan that, he joked, was more in keeping with being a former sheriff. On the way, we hardly spoke, each absorbed in his own thoughts. It wasn't until we reached West Hills that Richard broke the silence. "Remember our deal?" he asked. "No conflicts. We'd come as guests, socialize, and only then, when the time was right, would I bring up the history of the house." "I remember," I nodded. "I'm not going to make a scene, Richard. I just want the truth to come out." He gave me a quick glance. "The truth is often uncomfortable, Albert, especially when it comes to where you live. Are you sure you're doing this for Christopher and not to spite his wife?" The question caught me off guard. I wondered, did I really care about my son? Or was it to get back at Nikki for her arrogance and neglect? "I just wish my son hadn't lived in a house with that history without knowing about it," I finally said. "What would happen if they found out the truth later, from neighbors or casual acquaintances? Wouldn't it have been worse?" "Perhaps," Richard agreed, "but the choice of time and place mattered." Cedar Street greeted us with the soft light of street lamps. Autumn leaves rustled under the wheels of the car. As we approached house number 17, I noticed that there were about a dozen cars parked in the driveway and along the street. The party was in full swing. We parked a little farther away and walked slowly toward the house. Through the large windows, we could see people with glasses in their hands, and we could hear laughter and music. My heart pounded as Richard pressed the bell button. It took a few moments before the door opened. Christopher stood on the threshold, a glass of wine in his hand. When he saw me, he froze, his face a mixture of surprise and concern. "Dad?" he said incredulously, then turned his gaze to Richard. "And you're, Mr. Baker?" "Good evening, Christopher," Richard said with a smile. "I hope we're not too late. Gerald invited me to stop by, and on the way I met your father and decided to take him along. Old friends, you know." Christopher looked completely confused. He looked from Richard to me and back again. "Yeah, sure, come on in," he said at last, stepping aside. The guests had already gathered. We stepped into the spacious hallway. The house had changed since the last time I'd seen it, at one of Howard Pierce's barbecues. New wallpaper, new furniture, new paintings on the walls. But the structure was the same. The wide staircase leading to the second floor, the arched openings leading to the living room and dining room. Champagne. "It's a beautiful house," Richard said, looking around. "It's so spacious and bright." "Thank you," Christopher replied, but his voice sounded strained. Nikki had gone to great lengths with the renovations and decor. "Come into the living room. Everyone's gathered there." I saw him glance nervously toward the living room, obviously worried about his wife's reaction to my appearance. I, on the other hand, felt a strange mixture of excitement and determination. The living room was full of people. About 15 guests were standing in groups with glasses in their hands, talking and laughing. I noticed Nikki right away. She was standing in the center of the room, chatting with an older couple I'd seen during the day, her parents. She was wearing an elegant black dress, her hair styled in an elaborate updo. She looked like a confident homeowner. When we entered, the conversations in the living room didn't stop, but I noticed several guests turn their heads in our direction with curiosity. Nikki, engrossed in the conversation, didn't notice us right away. Christopher coughed awkwardly. "Nikki," he said, approaching his wife, "we have more guests." She turned around, a smile still playing on her lips. Then she saw me, and her face changed instantly. The smile disappeared, her eyes narrowed. For a moment, I thought she was about to make a scene right in front of all the guests. But instead, Nikki quickly pulled herself together, putting on her mask of gracious hostess. "Mr. Baker," she said, coming over to us and ignoring me completely. "What a pleasant surprise. Father mentioned you might drop in." "I couldn't miss such an event," Richard replied, shaking her hand. "Let me introduce an old friend of mine, Albert Whitney. We ran into each other in town, and I invited him to join us. I hope you don't mind." The look Nikki gave me could have frozen lava, but her voice remained friendly. "Of course not," she said. "Any friend of Mr. Baker's is our guest." I saw Christopher shift nervously from foot to foot behind her, clearly expecting an explosion, which to his surprise didn't come. "Nush, congratulations," Richard said, holding out a bottle of whiskey. "It's a lovely house. And a lovely watch from me," I added, offering my box. In addition to congratulations. Nikki took both gifts with a strained smile. "How nice," she said. "I'll put them with the others. Christopher, why don't you offer our guests a drink?" Christopher seemed happy for any excuse to get away from the epicenter of tension. "Of course," he said. "What would you prefer, Mr. Baker? We have wine, beer, whiskey." "Whiskey, if I may," Richard replied. "And please call me Richard." "What about you, Dad?" Christopher asked, looking me in the eye for the first time. "Same," I answered, trying to smile. "Thank you, son." He nodded and walked away to the makeshift bar in the corner of the room. Nikki stepped away too, setting our gifts on the table with the other presentations. "Keep it natural," Richard said quietly. "Let's walk around the room, see the house. I want to see how much it's changed since that time." We began to walk slowly around the living room, stopping here and there, looking at the interior. Richard nodded now and then, as if he recognized something. "This used to be Howard's library," he said quietly when we stopped at one of the doors leading out of the living room. "Sananhan, now I think it's a study, and there was the dining room. I think it's still in the same place." Christopher returned with 2 glasses of whiskey. "Here you are," he said, handing us the drinks. "Make yourselves comfortable. We'll have dinner soon." I noticed that he was avoiding my gaze. "Son," I said quietly, "I didn't mean to cause trouble. It's just that I happened to meet Richard and—" "Not now, Dad," he interrupted, throwing a quick glance over his shoulder where Nikki was talking to a group of guests. "Let's just, get through this night without a scene, okay?" I nodded, feeling a prick of pain from his detachment. "Christopher," Richard interjected, "you have a beautiful home. How long ago did you buy it?" "About a month ago," Christopher replied. "Nikki fell in love with it immediately, said it was exactly what she'd always wanted." "And you didn't know the previous owners?" Richard asked casually. "No," Christopher shook his head. "The house had been put up for sale by an estate agent. We were told that the previous owners had moved to another state." "I see," Richard nodded. "And before that? Didn't they tell you the history of the house?" Christopher frowned. "No, why?" he asked with a slight concern in his voice. "Was there something wrong with this house?" Richard was about to answer when Nikki's father, Gerald Bird, a tall, gray-haired man with a commanding expression, approached us. "Richard," he said, extending his hand, "glad you could make it." "Gerald," Richard shook his hand, "I couldn't miss such an event. Your daughter and son-in-law bought a beautiful house." "Yes, Veronique always knew how to choose the best," Gerald said proudly, then turned to me. "And you must be Christopher's father? Albert, if I'm not mistaken." "Yes," I shook his hand. "Nice to meet you." "Likewise," he replied, though his tone was far from friendly. "Veronique mentioned that you came by this afternoon." "Yes, I wanted to congratulate the guys on the housewarming," I answered. "But I guess I picked a bad moment." Gerald studied me with undisguised curiosity, as if trying to figure out what kind of man was standing before him. "Richard," he said at last, looking away from me, "you've been sheriff of this town for years. You must know the history of every house in West Hills, don't you?" "A lot of them," Richard answered evasively, "especially the ones where there were events that required police intervention." Something in his tone made Gerald wary. "What about this house?" he asked bluntly. "Was there anything noteworthy?" Richard looked at me, then at Christopher, who was listening to the conversation with growing concern. It was getting quieter in the living room. The conversations were dying down, and the guests were beginning to listen to our conversation. "Well," Richard began, "every house has a story. This one is no exception." "What kind of history?" Gerald insisted. "Something we should know?" At that moment, Nikki came over to us, obviously concerned about the crowd around her father and the sudden silence in the room. "Dad," she asked, "is everything okay?" "Just wondering about the history of your new home," Gerald replied. "Richard, as a former sheriff, should know more than anyone." All eyes turned to Richard. I could see him hesitate, clearly realizing that this was not the right moment for such a conversation, but it was too late to back out. This house, Richard began slowly, used to belong to Howard Pierce, a prominent Lakeland attorney. He and I were good acquaintances, used to play golf on weekends. E. Gerald hurried him up when Richard paused. And 15 years ago, there was a tragedy here, Richard continued. Howard came home earlier than usual and found his wife Lydia with another man. The man was his best friend and law partner, Edward Collins. There was complete silence in the room. Nicky turned pale. Christopher stared at Richard with wide-eyed wonderment. What happened next? Nicky's mother, an older woman with a pearl necklace, asked quietly. Richard sighed. Howard left the bedroom, walked to his office, took the gun out of the safe. He returned to the bedroom and shot first Edward, then Lydia. Then he came down here into this very living room, sat in a chair, and shot himself in the temple. Some of the guests gasped. Nicky stood frozen like a statue, her face white as chalk. I was one of the first on the scene, Richard continued, his voice quiet but distinct in the dead silence of the room. A neighbor heard the shots and called the police, but it was too late. 3 bodies, 3 lives cut short in an instant by betrayal and jealousy. Are you saying, Nicky's voice shook, that in our house, in our bedroom? She couldn't finish the sentence. Yes, Richard replied simply. That's exactly what I'm saying. And you knew about it? Nicky turned to me, her eyes burning with rage. You knew and you didn't tell us. I only remembered today when I saw the house, I replied. It was 15 years ago, Nicky. A lot of the details have faded from memory. But as soon as you remembered, you rushed over here to ruin our housewarming party? Her voice rose with every word. Is this your revenge for my not inviting you? Nicky, Christopher tried to intervene. I think Dad just wanted to. Shut up, she said sharply. You're always defending him. Nicky stood in the middle of the room, pale and confused, her parents beside her, both with expressions of shock on their faces. Christopher nervously shifted his gaze from me to his wife, clearly not knowing how to react. I felt strange. On the one hand, I felt satisfied that the truth had finally come out. On the other hand, seeing the shock on my son's face and Nicky's anger, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd gone too far. I don't believe it. Nicky finally broke the silence, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. I just don't believe that the realtor sold us this house without mentioning what happened here. Unfortunately, the law doesn't always require disclosure of such information, Richard said, his voice calm, but there was regret in his eyes, especially if the events happened a long time ago. A long time ago? Nicky laughed hysterically. 15 years is a long time. People were shot in our bedroom. In our bedroom. And you think that shouldn't have been mentioned? Christopher took a step toward her, trying to take her hand, but she pulled away sharply. Nicky, we can talk to the realtor tomorrow, he said quietly. There might be some legal grounds. Legal grounds? Her voice rose. Christopher, don't you understand? We bought a murder house. We sleep in a room where 2 people were shot. We're eating in a dining room where, she couldn't finish the sentence. Technically, no one was killed in the dining room, Richard interjected. Howard shot himself in the living room. That remark, instead of calming her down, only added fuel to the fire. Nicky turned to Richard, her eyes shooting lightning bolts. Oh, thanks for the clarification. The sarcasm in her voice could cut glass. I feel so much better now. Only in the bedroom and living room, not the dining room. What a relief. I saw Nicky's mother touch her shoulder, trying to reassure her. Gerald Bird kept a stony expression on his face, but there was concern in his eyes. Veronique, he said sternly, pull yourself together. Getting hysterical is not the answer to the problem. Problem? Nicky turned to her father. You call this a problem? It's a disaster. The whole town probably knows what happened here, except us. Can you imagine how I look now? Like a complete idiot. I don't think the whole town remembers the story, I tried to intervene. It's been 15 years and a lot of the details have faded from memory. I myself remembered only today when I saw the house. Nicky finally looked at me directly, her gaze full of contempt. And you, she said in an icy tone, surely you couldn't wait until tomorrow to tell us about it or call before the party. No, you had to show up here, in front of all our guests, in front of my parents, and lay out this Horror story. Nikki, Christopher tried to move closer to her again, but she backed away. Don't defend him, she snarled. He did it on purpose. To humiliate me. To ruin my evening, my house, my life. I felt something cold clench inside. My evening, my house, my life. Not a word about Christopher, about their life together. Nikki, I said, trying to speak calmly, I understand that you're upset, but I wasn't trying to humiliate you or ruin the evening. I just felt that you should know the truth about the place where you live. Now what are we supposed to do with that truth? She asked bitterly. Sell the house? After all the money I've put into renovations? After all the plans I've made? That's for you to decide, I replied. But at least now you know. You can make an informed decision. To my surprise, Christopher suddenly turned pale and looked away. Something in his demeanor alerted me. Christopher? Nikki asked, also noticing his strange reaction. What's wrong with you? My son cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Nikki, He hesitated. There's something I need to tell you. There was silence in the room. Even the remaining guests who were about to leave froze, sensing that something important was about to happen. What? Nikki asked, her voice suddenly quiet and wary. Christopher took a deep breath. Yeah, I knew, he said at last, about the history of the house. Dad told me when we first started looking for a place to live, and you showed me pictures of the house. I froze, feeling the blood drain from my face. It wasn't true. I hadn't told Christopher about the history of the house. I'd only remembered it myself today, when I'd seen the Pierce mansion with my own eyes. But before I could object, Nikki exploded. You knew? Her scream seemed to fill the entire house. You knew there was a murder in this house, and you let me buy it? You let me bring my parents here? Throw me a housewarming party? Christopher raised his hands as if in defense. I didn't think it was that important, he said. It's been 15 years. The house is beautiful. The neighborhood is great. The price was below market. Below market? Nikki interrupted. Of course it was below market. No one in their right mind would pay full price for a house where there was a triple murder. Double murder and suicide, to be exact, Richard corrected, and I groaned mentally. His pedantry wasn't good right now. Nikki ignored him, keeping her eyes on Christopher. How could you? Her voice shook with anger and resentment. How could you keep this from me? You knew how much I dreamed of the perfect house, how much I wanted to impress my parents, and you just let me live in ignorance? Christopher looked absolutely devastated. I was afraid you'd give up the house if you found out, he said quietly, and it was exactly what you wanted. And the price. We could never have found a house like that for that money. And you decided for me, Nikki said coldly. Decided that I should live in a house where people had been murdered and not know it. That's wonderful, Christopher. That's just fine. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. It was beyond all comprehension. My son was taking on guilt that wasn't his. Why? To protect me? Or just because he was used to being the guilty party in their relationship? Christopher, I began. You don't. Dad, don't, he interrupted me, his eyes pleading for silence. Please. And suddenly I realized he wasn't trying to protect me. He was trying to save his marriage. By taking the blame, he was giving Nikki the opportunity to direct her anger at him, not at me, not at the situation as a whole. It was his usual role, the shock absorber that takes all the blows to keep the peace. But at what cost? At the cost of his dignity? His truth? You know what, Nikki said, her voice low and dangerous. I can't talk to you right now. I can't even look at you. Liar. You've been lying to me all this time. She turned to her parents. Mom, Dad, you can stay in the guest bedroom. And you, she glanced at Christopher, you can sleep on the couch, or wherever you want. I don't care. Nikki, let's talk, Christopher pleaded. I can explain. Explain what? She interrupted. That you let me live a lie? That you put money before my right to know where I live? Or that your father, she threw a venomous glance in my direction, knew the truth and used it to humiliate me in front of everyone? Veronique, her father intervened, maybe we should leave. Stay at a hotel. Give you and Christopher time to talk alone? No, she said firmly. I want you to stay. And the ones who should leave, she shifted her gaze to Richard and me, are them. Now. Gerald looked like he wanted to object, but remained silent. Nikki's mother put a hand on her shoulder, but Nikki shook it off. I think we really should go, Richard said, rising. Again, I apologize for ruining the evening. Oh, don't worry, Nikki said sarcastically. You just ruined my dream of having my own house. It's no big deal. Richard shook his head guiltily and headed for the exit. I followed him, but before I left, I turned to Christopher. Son, I said quietly, you don't have to take on responsibilities that aren't yours. You don't have to live a lie to keep the peace. Christopher looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, a mixture of resentment, weariness, and something else deeply hidden. Go away, Dad, he said simply. Just go. Those words hit harder than all of Nikki's screaming. I nodded silently and followed Richard out the door, feeling something finally break inside. The door to 17 Cedar Street slammed shut behind us, cutting us off from the scene of the family conflict Richard and I had provoked with our revelations. We walked in silence to Richard's car. The night was cool and the stars twinkled brightly in the cloudless sky. Such a peaceful picture and such chaos in my soul. I'm sorry, Albert, Richard finally said as we got into the car. Maybe I shouldn't have told you about the history of the house at the party. Maybe I should have waited for a better time. No, you did the right thing, I replied. They had a right to know. How it would affect their lives was their choice. Richard started the engine, and we drove slowly away from the Pierce house. We drove in silence for a while, each one absorbed in his own thoughts. Finally, Richard asked, why did Christopher say you told him about the history of the house earlier? We both know he didn't. I sighed. He was trying to protect his marriage, I replied. By taking the blame, he gave Nikki the opportunity to direct his anger at him rather than the situation as a whole. It's his way of dealing with conflict. He's used to being a buffer between Nikki and me, between Nikki and the world. It's not a healthy relationship, Richard shook his head. Yes, I agreed, and I don't know how to help him, or if it's even worth trying. He's a grown man. It's his choice. Richard gave me a quick glance. What about you, Albert? What's your choice, I wondered. What could I choose in this situation? Continue to try to have a relationship with a son who seems to prefer the role of victim to the role of free man? With a daughter-in-law who sees me as an enemy and a threat? Or, my choice, I said slowly, is to be free, to stop clinging to relationships that hurt, to stop trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Richard nodded approvingly. A wise decision, he said. Not an easy one, though. Not easy, I agreed, but necessary. I can't keep living in the hope that Christopher will suddenly change, that Nikki will treat me differently. I have to accept reality as it is and move on. And what's moving on for you? Richard asked, turning down the street leading to his house. I smiled, suddenly feeling a lightness I hadn't felt in a long time. I don't know, I answered honestly. And that's the best part. For the first time in a long time, I'm free to choose, free to live without the constant worry about what Nikki would say or how it would affect Christopher. The car pulled up in front of Richard's house where I had left my car. Before getting out, I turned around to my old friend. Thank you, Richard, I said. Not just for tonight, but for making me see the truth. Not just about the Pierce house, but about my own situation. Richard shook my hand firmly. You're welcome, Albert. And don't be a stranger. Come by for a cup of coffee sometime. We'll reminisce about old times, talk about life. I will, I promised, getting out of the car. I got into my car and drove home, to my quiet, empty house, where there were no toxic relationships, no constant manipulation, no need to tiptoe around for fear of saying the wrong thing. And the strange thing is, for the first time in a long time, that house didn't seem empty or lonely to me. It seemed peaceful, my own space, where I could be myself. As I drove toward the house, I remembered the words Jenny had often repeated in the last months of her life. You can't help someone who doesn't want help, and you can't love someone who doesn't know how to accept love. At the time, I didn't quite know what she was talking about. Now I did. Parking in front of the house, I got out of the car and looked up at the night sky. The stars were bright, the air was fresh, the world was vast, And I was free to choose my path in this world without looking back at the toxic relationship that had kept me in an emotional prison for so long. I walked into the house, turned on the lights, and realized that I felt truly at home for the first time in a long time. Not because the people I love were here, but because here was me, the real me, without masks, without compromise, without the need to diminish myself to make someone else feel comfortable. I sat in my favorite chair and felt peace for the first time in years. Yes, I had lost my relationship with my son, at least as it had existed before, but I had found myself. And that was a trade-off I was willing to make. Because at the end of the day, the only person you're guaranteed to spend the rest of your life with is yourself. And if you can't be honest with yourself, if you can't respect yourself and your boundaries, what kind of relationship can you build with others? I knew I had some challenging days ahead of me. Christopher would probably call to blame me for ruining his marriage, or not call at all, choosing Nikki's side for good. But whatever happened, I was ready. Ready to live my life by my own rules, with the dignity and self-respect I'd deprived myself of for so long. And this was the liberation I'd been waiting for far too long.